Thank you for joining Jennifer Schaus and Associates in our 2019 Webinar Wednesday series. We are coming to you live from downtown Washington, D.C. Our webinars are every Wednesday, and you can find the upcoming schedule on our website. Past webinars and all recordings are also on our website and on the YouTube channel, along with over 160 other recordings on federal contracting topics. All are complimentary. If you have questions for our speaker today, you can email him directly with the contact information you'll see on the last slide. It's just a little bit about us. We are a Washington, D.C. based firm and provide services for federal contractors. This ranges from market analysis reports to proposal writing and also post-award compliance. More information is on our website, so please visit us there. We do offer advertising on our newsletter, so you can reach out to us there if you'd like more information on that. All right, our speaker today is Christopher Shiplet, and he's going to be covering SBA 8A sole source, how and why. Thank you for joining us today, Chris, and I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you.
You're most welcome. Let's go ahead and start by going to the next slide. You guys can read that while I'm introducing myself. My name is Chris Shiplet. I'm an associate with Randolph Law. We are a government contract specialty law firm. We handle all sorts of business for government contractors, including matters and issues related to the 8A, SBA 8A set-aside program. What we're going to talk about today is 8A sole source contract awards. I'm going to give you a brief background of the 8A program. I'm assuming many, if not all of you, are at least roughly familiar with the program, or you wouldn't be interested in the sole source awards portion of it, but I figured I'd give a little background before we launch into the meat of sole sources. So first thing is, what is the SBA 8A program? 8A program is one of many social and economically disadvantaged small business set-aside programs. That is, the Congress passed laws over the course of many years designating the SBA as the kind of governor of various set-aside small business programs. So veteran-owned small business, woman-owned small business, and the 8A program, another program called the Hub Zone program, that's sort of a geographic based program. But all of these programs have certain benefits if you are contracting with the federal government. Some of the benefits of the 8A program, for example, is you can have 8A set-asides that are competed only among other 8A companies. So and once you're registered for SBA 8A, your competition for certain contracts is limited. Agencies have goals that they have to meet in terms of their percentage contracting to small businesses and 8A small businesses, which means oftentimes there's subcontracting opportunities with large primes because those large primes, as part of their contracts, are required to demonstrate that they're meeting certain subcontracting goals. And then the topic of today's conversation is that, unique really to the SBA 8A program, the federal government is allowed to sole source, meaning give a contract to a company without the usual competitive requirements, contracts with 8A companies up to $4 million. Now, it's actually $4 million, but $7 million for manufacturing companies. So much of the government's business, particularly with small businesses, is service-based that we usually just say it's a $4 million standard. Next slide, please. Very briefly, and if you want to get more information on this, we talked about this in our immediately prior webinar. What is the process? There's a process for getting registered as an 8A. There are requirements to be registered for an 8A. Essentially, if you meet the requirements and you go through the process, you become an 8A entity, an 8A business. You then have 9 years as an 8A business, and you're eligible for each of the benefits that we discussed in the prior slide, including sole source awards. Next slide, please. So very briefly about sole source awards. The government can sole source up to $4 million. What does a sole source mean? Well, it means giving a contract to one company, but the government pretty much gives almost every contract to one company. The real difference is that the government doesn't have to compete the contract so long, and if they don't compete the contract, typically if the federal government doesn't issue a contract for public competition, they have to provide a very substantial justification for why they're using the government's money and just giving it to one company. This is a fairly obvious, it's fairly obviously designed to protect the taxpayers' money from fraud and waste and abuse. The 8A program allows for up to $4 million that the government, while they do need to justify this sole source award, they don't need to justify it nearly to the level that they would otherwise. So let's go ahead to the next slide. So what does that typically mean, or why would sole sources be advantageous to the government? Well, they're much faster than competitive awards. They're much easier than competitive awards, and they allow the government to particularly contracting officers who are the line officers on the hook for this, to meet their small business contracting requirements. And when I say much faster, I mean that a sole source award can oftentimes be turned around in maybe a matter of weeks, maybe 6 to 8 weeks, versus a fully competed contract award for the same requirement of, let's say, $4 million, that could have a year's lead time. So they're much faster, which makes it very attractive to the end client. They're much easier in terms of the documentation. There's not a full competition. There doesn't have to be a full evaluation, although there does have to be a proposal submitted by the company and an evaluation of that proposal. So they're much faster and they're much easier. And, contracting officers are required to attempt to help their agency meet these small business contracting requirements. So for those three reasons, they become very attractive for certain types of work and for certain types of awards to contracting officers. And then why is that? Go ahead to the next slide. That is in contrast, and we'll be brief on this. This is an example of what, other than a sole source award, a contracting officer might have to do to go from a requirement, their client says, hey, we need this stuff, all the way out to a contract award. They have to develop the requirements in either a request for a proposal or, it would be in a statement of work or a performance work statement, which might be attached to a request for a proposal or a request for a quote. The agency has to confirm and document that there's adequate competition for that. They have to conduct the competition, and depending on kind of how the competition's conducted, they might have to evaluate 4 proposals. They might have to evaluate 20 proposals. They definitely would have to evaluate in one of these competitions proposals that they have to give a real look to, but really have no chance of winning the award either because they're so technically poor or they so miss the mark that they're just never they're not realistic proposals. But the contracting officer and the agency really have to confirm all of this and document all of that. Ultimately, this all leads to number 5, which is that it is an intensive process. Next slide, please. So why then would, so let's contrast that with the sole source 8A. Now, they can't just award sole source 8A contracts willy-nilly. The contracting officer still has to justify why they've used the non-competitive process, but there was a recent, I want to say 6 months ago or a year ago, GAO bid protest decision that basically laid out that the way contracting officers have been doing this in the past is sufficient, and that way was a really minimum documentation or minimum justification. In the GAO case I'm thinking of, I think the justification was like 3/4 of a page that analyzed the competition, analyzed the requirement, analyzed the proposed sole source business, and said, look, this is work that should be issued sole source, and they didn't have to go into, contracting officer didn't have to go into a long-winded explanation of why sole source. So they still have to justify it. Justification doesn't have to be extensive, and I think this will be the 4th or the 5th time I say this, but it is an important point. All of this makes the contracting officers' lives much easier, which makes you, for that particular requirement, the contracting officer's friend and the end client's friend, because they can get what they want much quicker. Next slide. So there's a couple different ways that sole sources come out. This is one particular way, and I actually highlight this way, and we'll come back and talk about all the different ways at the very end. but I'm going to highlight this way that sole sources come out in particular because this is the most common. You have marketed your capabilities directly to the end customer. So stepping back a little bit, you have identified a requirement, or you already have a contract with the agency, or you have a solution that while you're not certain that the agency has a requirement for your solution, you are confident in your solution, you're confident in what you're selling, you've pitched the agency, you've gotten a meeting with the end client, you've talked them through what you can do. They're excited about it, and they say, yes, let's go with the sole source. So they talk to the contracting shop. The contracting shop, then the agency through the contracting shop offers the procurement to the 8A program. There are certain details that the offer must include. The SBA reviews it. The SBA will talk to you. The SBA will review your 8A bona fides and confirm once again, as they had done in the initial your initial acceptance into the 8A program, and every year and every time you may be bid protest, they will once again confirm that you are an eligible 8A. They will accept the offer into the 8A program, and then they will award the contract to you. Now, sometimes, and this is sort of a technical issue, sometimes the SBA is the prime contractor and you would be a subcontractor to the SBA. But for 90% of 8A contracts, SBA has, through a memorandum of understanding, delegated their contracting authority to the agency. So while it's technically, let's say Department of the Air Force contracts with SBA, who then contracts with you, your contract ends up being directly with the Department of the Air Force. Typically, you don't need to worry about the details of this unless I wrote in the slide something unfair happens. What that really means is somebody complains that it was an improper 8A award and they try to protest your bid. But you should understand the general process, because this is one of only three ways that agencies with requirements get hooked up with 8As to sole source. It is the most important way, and that is that you're pitching yourself directly to the agency, and then the agency, having received your pitch, found the money, gone to the contracting shop, said, we want this. The agency's then offering it into the 8A, the 8A program. Next slide, please. So let's back that up. What I just talked about, kind of highly technical. Let's back that up and let me kind of explain to you what that means in your business environment. The existence of the 8A sole source capability may change your business development dynamic. And what that means is that oftentimes, rather than just being the kind of receiver and collector of potential offers, right? Going on FBO, going on GovWin, hitting up partners to see what they've heard might be out there that you can bid on. You can, for contracts up to $4 million, you can kind of change it more to the what I'd call the private sector model, where you just straight pitching capabilities. Or, you're out there, you've got your business intel, you're discovering requirements, but you don't have to wait until the requirements have gone through the first part of the acquisition process. You can just say, look, we've heard you have this requirement. This is what we do. If you are interested in us, you can reach us through an 8A sole source. Now, it's up to $4 million, which, like everything else in government contracting, is simultaneously a lot of money and not very much money at all. And what I mean by that is that $4 million is, that's a lot of money. You can buy a very, very, very nice property with $4 million. But in the government contracting context, contracts for $4 million are very small contracts. And so when you're thinking about this as a strategy, I've not necessarily seen 8A companies that can really make a great living and grow as a company just on sole source contracts. You really need to consider, maybe you use the sole source contract, if you get one or you get two, as sort of your cash pool. The revenue coming in from that is your cash pool to allow you to pursue, to hire the people you might need to hire to pursue bigger contracts. And you're not going to be able to get sole sourced bigger contracts in this same manner that I'm describing, because the $4 million is a hard cap for 8A sole sources. So even though it changes your business development, because it changes your business development dynamic, in some ways, if you want to pursue this strategy of seeking out sole sources, you do need to be flexible and kind of break yourself out of the typical, receptive government contractor mode, and really be out there pounding the pavement and pitching your capabilities, pitching who you are, pitching what you can do, talking to small business offices or, contract shops directly in the various agencies where you work or where you want to work, to try and really match up what their requirements are with what your capabilities are, because that'll be the first step to getting the 8A. The rest is just the sole source. The rest is just process. It's having an end client that wants you or your product or your service enough for them to go pitch the contracting office that they can reach you through an 8A sole source. Last slide was kind of working backwards a little bit, because we already talked about this, but I do want to finalize this by kind of summing up. You're an 8A. We've talked about why sole sources are beneficial to the government. We've talked about different ways you can approach the sole source, but there really are only three ways, or three vectors, three pathways that a sole source comes up. The most important one is the third one that we've talked about, or excuse me, the second one that we've talked about, where you market yourself directly to an agency. But there's two others. One is that the government will seek the SBA out and ask the SBA to advertise a particular requirement within the kind of 8A realm. So they'll talk to an SBA business opportunity specialist, and if you have this SBA rep and you regularly talk to them, if that type of opportunity comes up, they might call you. They might say, look, we've got a contracting officer in such and such place. They have such and such requirement. I know from helping you out with your initial business plan that this is something you do. Would you be interested in responding? The second one, as we talked about, is that you're marketing yourself directly to the agency. And I really spent a lot of time on that one, because that is by far the most important one. The third piece, though, would be sort of a related but not identical way of using or utilizing your 8A capabilities, and that is that you're pitching the government. You're seeking out what the government needs. You find a requirement, but rather than pitching yourself directly to the agency, you go to your business opportunity specialist, your SBA rep, and you ask the SBA to pitch you. An SBA will do that for you. They'll write a letter to the contracting officer and explain to the contracting officer and explain to the end client that, that they have been told by you that this requirement exists, and they have a candidate 8A company that they believe could fill that requirement, which of course is you, and they believe that there may be a good reason to put this particular requirement into the SBA 8A program. The reason number three sometimes works out pretty well to your favor is now it's not just you pitching. Now the SBA is pitching on your behalf, and there's a little bit more gravitas, there's a little bit more weight to the SBA proposing you as the answer to the government's need, rather than you as one of 10,000 government contractors all running around DC and everywhere else the federal government is, saying you're the answer to all their problems. It can be good to have the SBA being the one out in front of you. That is, in a nutshell, what the SBA 8A sole source kind of concept is. If you are an 8A program, we can go to the next slide. It can be very valuable. It's limited to up to $4 million, which oftentimes is all you need if you're just starting out, or to get a little bit of cash flow to help you out with seeking out more competitive bids. But they don't just kind of spring up magically. You have to do your homework. You have to do your footwork. You have to identify requirements. You have to pitch yourself. You have to decide, you also have to be on the lookout for agencies seeking out 8As. If you do all of those things, however, an 8A sole source can be a very valuable addition to your business development toolkit. Thank you all for your time. Thank you for listening. I hope that this was valuable and informative.
Yeah, thank you, Chris, for joining us today. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to him at the email or phone number shown on your screen. And this concludes the webinar. Thank you.